We'd like to welcome you to the 150th anniversary celebration roundtable. And what we're planning on doing this morning is we've got some questions to ask you, and you can discuss them and talk about them. And this came out of an idea that I know some of you have been on that committee meeting, and when they were going over the pictures, everybody got excited, you know, and started talking about, reminiscing about the past. And so we thought we'd do a little of that this morning. We're going to reminisce, and we want to talk about the future too and the past. So I have several questions that I'll be asking. And all I ask is that we be considerate of other people, you know, and not try to talk over the top of other people, but we will give everybody a chance to be heard. So I think we need to introduce everybody around the table. And do you want to just start here and say who you are? I'd like to, if you want to, say how long you've been a member.
My name is Pat Owens, and I was a Murphy, and we joined in 1951, so I have been here 74 years, okay. But I actually didn't join till I was 12.
Yeah. Pat.
I'm Pat Dobbins, and we joined in 1990. We had come here from Knoxville with John working at the Y, and one of the things that drew us to Central was the people, but especially the music.
Yeah, I'm John Dobbins. We came in, as Pat said, in the spring of 1990.
I'm Dan Kelly, and I was christened in this church in 1930.
My name is Paul Henson, and I was baptized in this church when I was a youth. Don't remember the exact year. Left in 1956 and returned in 1996 and have been here ever since.
Thank you. Well, I'm Ernie Hall, and I've been here since, 30 plus years. I don't know. We came in the early 90s, me and my wife and daughter, so it seems like a shorter time than that, but I'm sure it all seems like a shorter time to all of you too. So, our roundtable discussion questions, and I'll read them all if you'd like me to, or I can go around the table, you know, if we can get started. Some of them are serious. Hopefully we're going to get some that aren't so serious and we can have a little fun with them. So the first question is, how have you seen Central United Methodist Church grow and change over the years? Does anybody have a response?
Well, when I was growing up, this church had nearly 900 members in it. That was back in the 30s and early 40s. And of course, as the years went by, people passed away. And things have changed, but it's still a thriving church.
Yes, it is.
My name is Linda Masters, and I've been at a member of Central for 71 years.
We know that the population has decreased in attendance, but the church has been very proactive in installing programs, changing programs to facilitate growing the population of the church. So they've been very amenable to changes that help us continue to strive to make the love of Christ known to all.
Thank you, Paul.
Ernie, I've been a member less than anyone else here has. Pat and I have, but I think the changes in the church have been monumental. Look at the physical changes in the buildings, the remodeling of the sanctuary, the fellowship hall, and the changes that were made there. But I think even more significant to me is we have changed the way we do ministry at Central Methodist Church. In 1990, when I came to Central with Pat, you came on Sunday morning you heard the sermon, and maybe on Wednesday night to a supper, and that was sort of the ministry of the church. And then we morphed into a congregation that small groups, like John Wesley had prescribed, became so very important in the life of the church. And that was a tremendous change. And going back to what Paul said, there were changes in attendance, but I think when we changed the way we do ministry, it changed, to me, the whole program of Central Methodist Church.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? We'll move on. What traditions and or practices from the past have been most meaningful to you?
I think for me, it has been the evolution of the Sunday school classes. When I look back, and Pat and I were young women at the time with a very young family, our group formed a class called the TNT class that stood for 20, not 30. And there was a group of us. We began by studying the life and teachings of Jesus. And that class, a lot of folks came and went, a lot of folks stayed, but I think that was extremely, for me, in my spiritual formation, it was an integral part of it. It was also a time when we had young children, and they had Sunday school classes. I recall a class called the Francis Asbury class, which my father was a part of, and that started out as a young adult class. I've watched classes come and go. I've participated in teaching some of those classes, but they've always been a very important part. As a matter of fact, they may have even been the original small group that has been here. So Sunday school has been for me, traditionally, a really meaningful part.
Thank you, Linda. How has being a member of Central impacted your spiritual life and growth?
Well, I think, to me, Ernie, one of the overriding attributes of this congregation has been the love that it has shown. And we all know that in our spiritual life, in our spiritual journey, that we need support, and we need the advice and the counsel, and we need the love of other Christians. And I'm not sure that you could have found it in any greater measures in another congregation than was found here at Central.
Yeah, I think so, John.
Linda mentioned the Sunday school. I think that the spiritual growth classes that we've had, Disciple 1, 2, and 3, and others that help us with a foundation for our spiritual growth. Strong programs.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to skip a couple of these and save them for later. How has Central helped you in difficult times and situations?
Well, I think all of us have had difficult times and trials and tribulations. But I remember when I was first married and very young and expecting my first baby, my husband was in Vietnam, and that was awful time. But without the support of this church, I don't know that we could have gotten through that easily. But as grandchildren and children come and go, my granddaughter, when she was 13, got cancer. And I can't tell you the support from this church and our minister at that time, Matthew Burton, what we would have done, what I would have done without that support. And as we mentioned the other day in Bible study, during that time, this church had 3 young children that were suffering with cancer. Eric Wells, Kayla Mitzenmeyer, and my granddaughter Katie. Without the support of this church, I don't know any of us would have gotten through that at that time.
Thank you, Pat.
I'll go back a little further than that. When Korean War started in 1950, I got drafted and I went down and got inducted into the Army in Charlotte. And that night they come back and said, "You're going back home." Said the war's going to be over by December, but in December, half a million Chinese come in across the border, and in January I was back down there. But the thing that really made me think about it is the day that the last Sunday I was here before I reported back on Monday, Preacher Kirby called me up here in front of the church, and they all prayed for me. And I think that was, well, I not only think, but I know that's what brought me back.
Thank you, Dan. John, you say something?
Well, I can think of 2 instances where really the congregation of this church made a great difference in my life. My father died when he was about 10 years ago. I was 77 years old when he died. And Dad and I were pretty close together. He lived in Knoxville. Of course, we lived in here in Canton. And at the reception for Dad the night before the funeral, I looked up through the door at the back of the funeral home, and through that door came a group of folks from Central United Methodist Church, including Michael Jordan, who came to Knoxville just to say, "We're sorry," and to be with you. I don't think there are a whole lot of congregations that would have happened in. Mm-hmm. And even more recently, and some of the people here know what I'm talking about, but Pat and I went through an extremely difficult time within our family. And it was the Rohenry class and friends in Central United Methodist Church that gave us enough comfort and support to get through a situation that I don't ever want to go through again. And we're forever grateful for those friendships and the support that we got during that time.
I know as the moderator, I'm supposed to be asking questions, but instead of answering them, but listening to you talking about the love that the church showed you at the time. Same thing happened to me and Carolyn when Carolyn was going through her sickness and her death. And the Sunday school class supported both of us, and they were there with meals, and the entire church sent, cards and letters and even gift certificates to restaurants and stuff. And the outpouring of love was, like you said, overwhelming. And I don't know that, I would have made it through if it hadn't been for that. So,
Ernie, I was just thinking that as we've been talking about those who have wrapped their arms around us, I was thinking that I've been on the receiving end of that for a long, long time. my first husband, who was a member of this church, died when he was 26 and I was 25. And so there's been so much I have received, but I've also watched other people go through things, and it has difficult, very difficult things. There have been deaths in this church that have been both with very young people, with children, with young adults. And I think about how not only have those of us who've been bereaved been cared for, but it just happened that the next time it might be somebody else. So you turn around and give them the kind of love that they gave you. So it really that love really has, John, come full circle in so very many cases.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. What are your hopes for the future of the Central United Methodist Church?
When I think of the years raising my children here and looking at grandchildren, I remember one Christmas Eve, and I believe it was Rebecca, came up to me, and my grandsons have been coming every Christmas Eve since, and they don't live here, they live down in Conover. And she commented, and now they're like 6'2" and 6'3". She said, I have watched those boys grow up, and it's so good to see them every Sunday. And it is great to see them. And on Wednesdays, we see Elias running around, and we see Henry and different things. Children are so important. I remember when Dave Melton would be preaching, and he'd look up and he'd say, has anybody seen Christopher? And he could have been sitting with anybody. It was just great. But what makes my heart swell is to know that children are welcome and that they come and go, and it doesn't matter who they belong to, we're all watching out for them.
Thank you, Pat. Anybody else? And this is sort of a similar question. It just says, what type of church do you envision us to be in the next 10, 25, or 50 years?
That's kind of hard. That's a hard question to answer. I mean, we hope that it's going to continue to grow and have outreach and bring in new people and spread the word. But that's one of the things that's going to be up to the lot. Like she just got through saying about the children. Without the children, it's not going to make it. And we've got to have, it's great to see these kids coming in now.
It is, yeah. I think part of that too is we have to encourage those kids, even though, you know, like me, I don't have kids here. I can still encourage the kids that are here. So, how can Central United Methodist Church make known the love of Christ to all?
Well, I think, Ernie, that certainly preaching from the gospel is very, very important. But I'm not sure that community responds to that form of ministry as much as they do seeing people from Central Church downtown cleaning the windows on a Sunday morning or trimming bushes at someone's house or painting a mobile home that someone is living in, or performing a lot of other works in the community that Christ would have wanted us to support our neighbors with. And to me, that is the extension of Christ's church, almost more so than the preaching the gospel, as important as that is on Sunday morning, is getting into the community and being the presence of Christ in the community.
John, I agree with you, but a program that we're doing now that I think is so very important, and it's back to children and feeding them, is the backpack program. And as of last week, they announced that we are now feeding 76 children every Friday. And it's just amazing. And I know there's 76 more and 76 more somewhere else. But I'm just proud that we are helping those that aren't sufficiently fed.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pat, I agree with you. We have to continue the outreach programs that have been started over the years and expand that so that people can see that we are active in the community, showing the love of Christ.
As a
Pat, did you want to say something?
As a member of the Women's Society through the years, I want to hope that in the future we will continue to be just showing up, because that's what we've done through the years with our ministry. We just show up and do what's needed, and I hope it continues.
Thank you, Pat.
And I hope that we continue the very welcoming, hospitable attitude of this congregation on every single Sunday morning. We have welcomed folks that I don't know might receive a welcome in other places. I think about the morning the cowboy walked in with his squirrel and sat on the front row.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the few animals that we've had come to worship with us. But there is a feeling of, we're so glad that you're here, whoever walks through that door. And I think that's and I'm thinking specifically of Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? We're going to maybe get away from the serious right now and get into something that might be more fun for you to talk about. What's your favorite memory associated with Central United Methodist Church?
I can go way back from that. I'll tell you that right, probably about halfway down there was that's where I started Sunday school in 1933. It was the old parsonage that it was full of Sunday school. It didn't start till the first grade, but my aunt taught the first grade, and so she brought me 4, 5, and then the 6th year I was in her class, and then the next year I went to Miss Liner's class and on up. But the parsonage sat here from the old church, and it was a fun time, and all those kids that was in there then, we grew up together, and that's when the church was so large. I mean, it was, and kids everywhere, but we still, it was like John said back then, the preachers were a little more conservative, I guess you'd say, but they preached their sermon, and then that was it. But then you come back on Sunday night and had a service, but that was really all we ever had. On Wednesday night, we didn't have any service. But it was so much fun back then, the people and how many was here, and all the people that I knew then just about are gone, so, except me. But it was a fun time.
I have two instances of really fun. There's so many, but two stick out in my mind. Linda mentioned last week about MYF, and our MYF was from many churches. It just wasn't from here. The kids that came, all of us that came, were from Baptist church, Presbyterian church, but we all came. But someone called us one evening and said, "What are you wearing?" And some people could have had on pajamas, some people could have maybe even didn't have anything on, I don't know. But you told them what you were wearing, and that's what you had to wear to MYF that night, that Sunday night. And people wore really strange things, but it was so much fun. And then, of course, MYF was fun. You may not remember, but under the floor is shuffleboard courts. And do you know how many times at MYF we get up there and play shuffleboard in the fellowship hall? So those memories are great. But one memory that really sticks out is when my husband was alive and my boys were like teenagers. We were the only Methodist church in Haywood County that participated in the Baptist softball league. And we had the greatest team, and we had the most fun, and every Saturday we were out there. And I'll never forget our preacher at that time, his wife, their two boys were on the team, and she said, "That's the only preacher's kid in this county that wears a beer T-shirt." But they were out there playing ball and having the best time. And like I said, we were the only Methodist church in that Baptist league.
Yeah.
As you might expect, some of my best memories are involving my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But one that I especially remember was when Star stood at that pulpit after a mission trip and brought tears to my eyes as she told her experience in Chicago.
Sorry, John.
Go ahead, Bob.
The thing I remember that my wife and I were married in this church in 1956. Very special time for me.
I'm sure. Yeah.
There's so many funny things that have happened, Ernie, that I can remember over the years and unusual. I remember in March of 1993, if you remember, there was a huge snowstorm, about 30 or 35 or 36 inches of snow. One morning, my phone rang, and it was David Melton, who was the pastor at that time, and he said, "John, you got a four-wheel drive, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I got a four-wheel drive." And he said, "I need a favor from you." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "We got two people in the church that want to get married, and they can't get here. They've been snowbound. Would you go get them?" And I said, "Well, I guess I will. Who was that?" And he said, "Well, it was Linda and David, and their family has to leave town, and they've got to get out because of the snow, but they can't get to the church to get married, so would you go pick them up?" Well, I went to pick them up, and Linda come out of the house with a wedding dress on in the snow of 30 inches, I guess, and then picked up David, brought him to the church. You remember that, Linda?
Yes.
And to get married. And there's so many other things that have happened that have been just, I remember the time that Jonathan and Christopher Caldwell during the Lord's Supper got into a fight up here up at the altar rail. Two little bitty boys that got into an argument, a fight during communion up here. And Pat was talking about the great-grandchildren and the children. And one Sunday, Maddie, she was about, 4 years old or so. It was during communion. And Maddie, after it was all over with, came back, and we were sitting in the back of the church, and she poked her grandmother with her elbow, and she said, "Granny, I'm still hungry." It's just been 35 years of funny things, I think, that have happened in the church, and some of them happened when David Christie was I would get just almost want to retreat or to run, when David would call or he'd come and he'd say, boy, have I got an opportunity for you? Because I knew it was something that he wanted. But it's been a great 35 years of memories of children and funny things and picking up people in the snow and listening to Dan Kelly in Sunday school saying, I don't want any more pop quizzes in this class.
Another time that I can remember right here in 1983, I stood right here in front and waited on my daughter to come down the aisle to get married. And I lost my little girl. But I've got her back now, so it's good.
Well, I'm going to go back to David Christie and John. We had a small group called the Fishermen, and they actually were fishers of men, but they fished also. And they periodically would come to the lake, and David was fishing out at the one end of the cove, and John was going to fish off of the dock. And my husband, and we had a white plastic chair, and Butch said, John, don't sit in that chair. It'll slide on that aluminum and whatever, and John said it'll be all right. So John sat down on that chair and started fishing. In a few minutes, he fell. That chair went into a million pieces, and white plastic was all over the lake. And David Christie, I'll never forget, he was up there and he saw what happened. He was rolling on the ground laughing, and we had mowed. He had grass all over him, and he was just rolling, laughing. And he said, you know what, I think I better go check on John. He could be hurt. But anyway, he even used that as his sermon one time to why you can't eat fish in Kiwi because it's full of plastic, because John broke the chair. So, John, you're right. There are so many funny remembrances and things that we could go on.
One of the worst things or funniest things he ever did, though, he was preaching one Sunday morning, and he was standing right at the front, and he said, you know, I went fishing this week, and he said, I was dobbinized. And everybody looked at him strange, and nobody knew what he was talking about. And he said, yeah, I was dobbinized. He said, that's a word I just made up. It means I didn't catch any fish.
I have 3 quick memories. Two of those involve MYF. One of them was Dad had just bought a 1956 Chevrolet Impala, and I had just gotten my driver's license. It was Sunday evening, time for MYF, and we went to MYF, and for some reason, I dropped my little sister off and had to go run an errand and then come back. Well, up at the very top of the where the pastor's study was, as you came down into the fellowship hall, there were 2 iron posts with a wrought iron railing that went in. And I pulled as close to that as I could get because it was raining. Barbara Ann opened the door, got out, and I backed the car up for some reason. I don't know why I backed it up. Maybe I didn't even put it in drive. But the door fell off the car. And the Braxton boys, who were members of the parsonage family, came running down and bringing ropes, and we tied the door back on with ropes, and I drove it home. Daddy didn't say anything. He just said, how in the world did you get this home? Which was, you know, quite the unusual thing at the time. The other MYF story involves something we used to do a lot, and we would meet at the church here at 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, why in the world would somebody meet here at 4 o'clock in the morning? We'd all get in the car, plural, we'd all get in the cars and hike to the top of Mount Pisgah and have a sunrise service and cook breakfast together. And all that was on a Saturday morning. The most embarrassing situation, as a matter of fact, one of the most embarrassing moments of my life took place in this sanctuary. When I was growing up, we did not have acolytes. We didn't even know what the word meant. I'm hoping Rebecca and Ralph do not remember this story. I said to somebody, you know, I've always wanted to be an acolyte, and I've never been one. And one Sunday morning, we had a guest pastor. It was the Reverend Michael Rich. And Charlie Harden was back there, and he said, Linda, we don't have any kids here. It was spring break. We don't have any kids here. Would you be an acolyte? Oh, and I just swelled up and said, oh, yes, I'd be thrilled to do that. So I came down the aisle watching that flame and being so afraid it was going to go out. So I didn't look ahead. All I did was walk down. I'd watched these little girls do this. I knew exactly how to do it. And I kept my eyes on the flame, and I walked up, and I bowed at the altar because I'd seen the little girls do this. And I looked up, and the candles were already lit. Mike Rich had found some matches somewhere up here and lit those candles. When I looked up and saw that they were lit, I said, oh, blank, before I even thought. And the choir got tickled, the entire choir. And I just turned around and walked not down to where I usually sit, but all the way back to Charlie Harden. I don't think I've ever used that word in church, ever. And I don't even know if I've ever thought that word when I was sitting there. But I remember that vividly and looking at you guys and thinking, oh, and trying to keep my dignity as I walked back down the aisle. There are lots of fun things. I remember when John Gehring put a cricket down the neck of Miss Catherine Jacobs. Yeah, he was sitting behind her, and he dropped a cricket down her neck. And she was, I'm trying to think of somebody that she was like, but that's very hard to find, unless it was Aunt Bee on Andy Griffith. Maybe she could have been Aunt Bee. But there are all kinds of wonderful stories. And the important part of this is that as much joy as we've experienced here, we've also experienced pain. And it's life. This has been part of our life from the time we were very, very small.
Going back to kids like that, and Michael Gehring and his son, one day Michael called me and said, can you come up to the parsonage? He said, the chandelier's falling down in the dining room. And I said, that doesn't hardly seem possible, but I'll be there. I went up, and there's the chandelier hanging down by the wires. And I said, I can't believe that just failed. And he said, well, actually said John got up on the table and swung on it. So I put it back up, and it was not too long after that. He called again and said, could you come up here? Said the fan's broken in John's bedroom. Well, I went up there, and the fan was all broken up, and I said, I can't believe that just broke like that, Michael. And he said, Well, I found out that it was running and he stuck a broom up in it to stop it. But he was a character, and I remember he'd slip out and crawl up through there, going out away so his daddy wouldn't see him.
We haven't said anything about the choir, so I'm going to say one funny time at the choir. Years ago, my friend Regina Phillips, she was married to Nick, and I joined the choir. Neither one of us can sing our way out of a paper bag, but it was fun. And we loved coming, and we would sit up there. And one Sunday, we started getting antsy, and she looked at me and she said, "What's that crawling on our robe, on her robe?" And it was a tick. And so we were sitting there, and the anthem came, and what she did is she said, "What am I going to do with that tick?" And I said, "I don't know." So I reached over, and I pinched her robe where the tick was. And then we were sitting there with that pinched robe, and I said, "We're going to have to get up and get out of here." So here we are, getting up out of the choir, holding the pinched robe and going out the door and getting rid of the tick. But everybody in the congregation, I'm sure, was thinking, what in the world are they doing?
Yep.
You know, I remember one Sunday afternoon, Pat and I were in California, and it was when cell phones first came into being, and we all know that Linda, how precise she is in her speech and her reading. And on the Sunday afternoon, driving down the road in California, my cell phone rings. It's Dan Kelly. And he said, "John, I want you to know that Linda read the scripture this morning, and it took her 25 minutes to get through the scripture, you know, in the church." See, it was always something like this, you know, that was going on.
What John did not say is that was the entire first chapter of Genesis. And it was the story of the creation, and it went on and on and on.
And also, she preached longer than the preacher did.
Anybody else? I think we've gone over most of the questions that I was going to ask. I know we allotted maybe to be here to 12, but we can go ahead and wrap it up here in a few minutes if you'd like to. So, yeah. And, you know, last question I thought of, you know, was we know that this is going in the time capsule. 50 years from now, someone here in the church will dig that time capsule up and pull out the transcript of what you have talked about here. So, you want to say something?
I want to talk about the time capsule. So I told my kids the other night, on Wednesday night, I said, "How old are you?" 6, 7, 8. Mm-hmm. I said, "When you're 56, 57, 58, you're the next group that's going to be doing the 200th. And Mia, they took it and they were very serious, Maddox, because that is what's important.
Yeah.
And we want them, you guys are important, those little guys are really important because we want them to keep this going."
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to say thank you to Ralph and Rebecca and all the others on the committee. They've done a tremendous job.
They have.
Worked really hard and found out a lot of facts that a lot of people never even knew about. Mm-hmm. And it's been a pleasure and a blessing to have done this. Yeah. And I hope we can do it again, and I'm here when they have another 25 years or something.
Yeah. The question I was going to put forward is, like we're talking about opening up the capsule 50 years from now, if you could say something to them, what would you like to say to that person?
Thank you for continuing to be so faithful.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
I guess, Ernie, that I would say, I do hope that you carry on the ministry of this church and what it's meant to this community in a way that it brings Christ and that it's as meaningful as it has been to me.
And I'd like to say, I'd like to thank all of you for being here this morning. And I'd also like to say thank you for being mentors and being examples for me of how Christians should live their lives. Because every one of you have played an important role in my journey into being a Christian. So I thank you for that.
Ernie, I think I would say to the persons opening the time capsule that I hope that you have enjoyed this past 50 years as much as all of us have enjoyed the previous 50 years.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, and I'd like to also say that I hope that you all will continue doing what's been going on in this church, and that when this capsule was made, you were just 5 and 6 years old.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah. Well, again, I'd like to thank all of you for being here this morning. I know I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And I'm sure 50 years from, well, this will be on the church website. So if you like to watch it later, you'll be invited to. But I hope 50 years from now that when those people open up that capsule, they'll be just as thrilled about listening to this as I have been. And again, thank you all for being here this morning. So.
Thank you.